with this kind of cost, it's very difficult, especially for developing countries, and to achieve sustainable development, to achieve Millennium Development Goals. If you just take a second to review one of the disasters, maybe come across your mind is the earthquake occurred in China. And just think how these disasters affected the economic or social sectors. Then you come to the conclusion that without addressing disasters, and it's very difficult for us to move forward economically. Next one. This is another data I want to address the emphasis we need to really attack the disaster risks. Here is we can compare the economic losses between the rich nations and the poorest nations. In terms of absolute dollars values, the rich nations actually suffer most of the losses. But if we convert it into GDP, the percentage of the nation's GDP, and we can see the disasters actually hit the poorest nation most. And this is not updated data, but the situation has not changed. Next one. So, what is the impact of disasters to human beings? And here is the report from the World Bank after they did their global hotspot study. And in this, the result of this study shows 3.4 billion people in the world are relatively highly exposed to at least one natural hazard. 1.5 million people are relatively highly exposed to 3 or more hazards. So you can see the threat to the human being or to human being security is also big. Next. And let's see that how disaster affected human beings in a different way. Here we can see we divided the human groups in terms of income. And the people with low income are very likely to be killed by all kinds of disasters. And people with high income, the last line, the people with high income shows their resilience to the impact of disasters. Here I want to point out, it's not disasters that discriminate certain groups or discriminate the poor people. It is the poverty actually make people more vulnerable to the impact of disasters. And they have no capacities to address their vulnerability or risks of disasters. So therefore, we actually, this year, we have been trying to gather the world data, how disasters actually linked with poverty reduction. And yesterday, we also tabled some good practice from NGO societies and tried to show the link between disaster risk reduction and the poverty reduction. If some of you may not, because it's heavy for us to bring the publication here, some of you may not have a copy, but you can always download from our website. Next. So with all this data and the trends, and we may ask ourselves, can we achieve sustainable development without taking account of disaster risk reduction? I think the short answer is no. And this is simply the risks and the vulnerabilities will always remain. And we need to assess them, we need to address them in a constant manner or in hand in the development processes. And in other words, we also say very often, disasters actually is the failure of socioeconomic development. So not necessarily if you build a school in a poor community and you help them to lift poverty. The reason for that, because if you did not take risk reduction into consideration, you may build the school in a disaster-prone area, and you may make those children vulnerable to the disasters. And I give you two examples. When I was working with OCHA, I went to China to assess the impact of earthquakes. There are two big earthquakes, 6.5, 6.1, occurred between half an hour, 30 minutes. And 3 schools, 2 middle schools and 1 primary schools were all destroyed. You can imagine if that was not a winter holiday, how many kids' lives will be taken away in this earthquake. So we say earthquakes do not kill people. It is badly built buildings kill people. So it's our humans' activity actually increase our vulnerabilities. And we need to understand disasters are not natural. It's a human-made. It's a human development activities increase our vulnerabilities to the impact of disasters. So there actually, that's why we need to address the root causes of vulnerabilities. And here I'm not going to read it in details anymore. And to conclude, disaster risk reduction is a sound investment for sustainable development. I think yesterday also came to the floor. If you invest $1, you can save $7. In certain studies said if you invest $1, you can save $4. Some even say if you invest $1 in disaster risk reduction, maybe you can save $38. So different studies have different conclusions, but one point is the same. Prevention is cheaper than cure. So we should take more actions in reducing disaster risk. Next. Now I come to the progress and the challenges in disaster risk reduction and the Hugo framework implementation. Over the years, we have seen a paradigm shift from reactive to proactive. And before 1990s, it's very much a civil defense operation and focus on relief. In other words, at that time, we believe disasters are natural. That's why we call it natural disasters. So we wait, and even some, I remember 2001, when I went to India, we had a meeting with governments, and they said, well, natural disaster is an act of God. So there is nothing we can do. We just have to prepare ourselves to respond. Actually, that is wrong. Disasters are not the act of God. It's a human-made. It's our activities, socio-economic activities, actually contribute to the risks. So at that time, we only focus on relief operations. But during the 1990s, the United Nations declared the International Decade for Natural Disasters. At that time, you see our understanding still dominated by the perception that disasters are natural. That's why we call the Decade for Natural Disaster. During that decade, the first World Conference was held in Japan, Yokohama. And at this meeting, they come out with a Yokohama strategy and a plan of action. In this strategy, they basically focus on the link between development and disasters. And move on, at the closure of the 1990s, and the government realized with the evolving process of understanding, disasters are not natural. We need to address it. It goes hand in hand with socioeconomic development. So therefore, they propose a strategy for disaster reduction. And this strategy later on approved in 2000 by the General Assembly. And now we are focusing building resilience to disasters. Next. So this is basically disaster risk reduction And the major milestones contribute to the paradigm shift from active to proactive, from reactive to proactive. So here you can see it has taken quite a long time, but this still not accepted